Now that we're out of space paranoids, we can do a few things before the tough challenge ahead. Firstly, take care of this forced battle, in which the most dangerous enemies are the Crimson Jazz at the end and the Dancers. Still, by keeping our head, we can reflect everything to death without even needing to use an ether, or we can use Stitch, though I do believe you'll get your drive refilled after this battle as long as Stitch is still out when it's done, so that would probably have been the easier option. Now, it's time to level up Wisdom Form once more, which gives us another MP haste ability, and to fully level up Master Form as far as it'll go right now. Master Form levels by collecting Drive Orbs. Since the entrance to the Cavern of Remembrance just opened up, we can travel in and out repeatedly and collect all of the Drive Orbs from the strange ball object right inside. It takes about 15 minutes to max it out at this point, giving us Aerial Dodge too. This is not only good for extra height, and offers horizontal speed and distance, but it has reflective iframes too, which we can use to avoid damage while reflecting projectiles. However, it's worth noting that depending on how you would want to interpret the rules, I kind of broke said rules a bit here without realizing it. I didn't know it at this point, but Master Form does physical pokes with the floating Keyblade when you're using spells. This means getting close to use Thunder on the ball means I'm also technically swinging my Keyblade and hitting the ball. It was at the end of the game when I realized this and I was mortified. Luckily, I then did a bit of experimenting and realized that Magnet allows us to avoid hitting the ball with the Keyblade, but still farm the Drive Orbs, so you can level it up without hitting the ball with your Keyblade, though this means we can't really use Master Form in battle. I suppose it's a good thing that I didn't. Once the grinding is done, the next fight is just more of the same. In this case, I summoned Stitch for safety, since there are a lot of dancers here. He kept my MP refilled, and would block basic attacks when I missed my reflect timing, but also if we take a serious hit, Stitch will usually stagger enemies, forcing them to drop a plethora of HP orbs. Next up is a Gauntlet, the opening act of which is a legitimate fight with the Demix. Demix can combo us to death with several attacks, and we often have to expend a lot of MP to reflect through his attacks. Also, for some reason, fire doesn't do that much to him unless we are in a drive form, meaning reflect will honestly be our big damage dealer. The fight starts with more water clones like it did in Olympus. Summon Stitch and focus on using fire whenever the wild dance reaction command isn't available. We can do this with Wisdom Form, but Stitch can easily be kept active throughout the entire battle, unlike Wisdom. Besides, Stitch can sometimes use his HP Orb Stagger ability, which decimates the water clones. Once that's over, use a few fire combos on Demix. When he responds with water pillars, wait for him to do the linear set of them. If we position ourselves correctly, the reflect will hit him. Most of this battle is fairly standard in terms of how careful we need to be, and when he provides his openings. The challenge comes in not being comboed to death. With that battle done, here comes the scary part. We immediately need to do 4 separate mob fights where Final Fantasy characters will come to help us. These battles aren't hard, but one wrong move during any of them will send us all the way back to before we fought Demix. Even though our allies are really competent here, I clenched pretty hard. After that is the 1000 Heartless Challenge, which goes more or less how it would otherwise. No combos? No problem, because the Rising Sun and Sparkle Ray reaction commands are actually faster and can even be safer, so we save our MP for Cure instead. With that done, we're halfway through the game. It's now time for our revisits to each world, most of which are really short and simple. Land of Dragons is up first. At the mountain summit is a battle with Riku. We don't have to beat him completely, just do a couple of bars of damage, reflect him when safe, and use Speed Trap to do easy damage. Next is a Heartless battle in the Palace Square. Chicken Little is still slightly luck-based, but he offers a cheaper magnet than the one we have, so I use that to my advantage. Not an easy fight, but not a difficult one either. Then we go inside the palace and have to fight a bunch of sniper nobodies. This is extremely easy since it's such a tight hallway. Since I still had Chicken Little ready, his magnet breaks this fight. Magnet, spam fire, pick up MP orbs to avoid using ethers, and that's about it. Now we've made it to the Storm Rider. Storm Rider is a bit difficult, but quick reactions can deal with it. Our goal is to stay on its back as long as we can. Don't destroy its lightning rods. Instead, stand up at the horns and reflect the lightning it shoots. Use the hang on reaction command when necessary, and the rest of the battle is fairly standard. Moving to the Beast's Castle revisit, we have a few easy mob fights that can be trivialized using Stitch and Thunder Magic. Then comes Zaldin, who is fairly straightforward too. Reflect or block his basic attacks to get a bunch of jump commands. His major strengths are his DM, which keeps him out of our reach for quite a while, and the faster, trickier basic attacks he'll start using in the second half of the fight. Still, well-timed Reflex will deal with everything. Stitch can keep our MP topped up when we need, as well as help us avoid some attacks. Reflecting Zaldin's later attacks usually leads to his Sky Spear attack, which guarantees 9 full jump commands, as long as we're not asleep at the wheel. With this world done, we get Reflera. Olympus, upon revisit, is much easier than before. The only fight worth noting is the fight with Hades. We primarily need to use Hercules' Aura Spheres to damage Hades and make him vulnerable. To maximize MP use efficiency, we can hit Hades with all of the Aura Spheres that appear, rather than just one to make him vulnerable. Safely reflecting Hades' attacks the rest of the time while avoiding the rain of fireballs isn't too difficult. Pirates in Port Royal are still as dangerous as before, but still as vulnerable too, so the initial fight is easy work. Then we'll do our first fight against the Grim Reaper. This is simple, since Grumpy Grimpy over here reacts to magic just like the pirates, and its patterns here are extremely simple. Bait an attack and then air reflect. We'll get horizontal slash from it, which serves no purpose here. After some shenanigans that involve more medallions is the real fight with Grim Reaper, which is no joke. The main idea is that we need to freeze the boss in place with Blizzard, collect the medallions it drops, and then use Thunder on it to drop more medallions. Then, back up and repeat the process. If we're lucky, the boss will keep trying to retaliate with the same attack until we deplete its stock of medallions. Put them in the chest, and it'll become vulnerable to real damage. During this phase, we can play it just like we did in the previous fight by reflecting his basic attacks. This battle has a few phases you're forced through, but the main differences are the amount of medallions the boss will grab initially each time, and the fact that it'll sometimes use a DM attack. The DM is easy to avoid by jumping on these boxes. However, it seems like if you take too long to collect all the medallions, Grim Reaper will almost immediately revert back to its invulnerable phase and steal the medallions back. Still, by playing a little more risky, I was able to take him down. Finishing this visit upgrades Magnet and gives us the glorious Duck Flare limit for Donald. Agrabah's revisit is largely a gimmick visit. Most of it will be done on the magic carpet. You have most of your options on the carpet for all but one part. The initial few sections are pretty basic. The auto-scroller section is the first real challenge, since it strips us of every option except for Keyblade attacks. This is another place where I thought I might have to use the Keyblade, but luckily, you don't actually have to kill any enemies. The main thing to be wary of is the hook bats. Once they start twirling around, it may seem like you need to avoid them when they launch at you, but actually they're only really dangerous if you touch them while they spin in place. Since we can't cure, this took a few tries, but it wasn't too bad. Finally, we've got stupid Genie Jafar, who is usually one of the easiest bosses in the game. His retaliations almost always miss us, the first half of the battle sees him doing almost nothing, and he spends an eternity staggered. The goal is to poke at his rock-hard abs until he doubles over, then damage his head and use roll-up right before he recovers to get time so that we can do even more damage. I'm a big dumb idiot, so I used Fire here, since it was doing more damage than Blizzard for some reason, and it takes less MP, meaning I could get more spells out. Problem is, Jafar bobs around so much that many of my fires would miss, some outright. So Blizzard is a smarter option, as is using Circle of Life instead of Hidden Dragon, since getting a quicker MP charge is more important here than MP Rage. We need to be careful to hit MP charge at the right times or we're screwed. Once Genie Jafar starts summoning fireballs, we more or less have to use Reflect to avoid them while doing damage to his stomach. We really don't have time to do anything else, and even then I couldn't completely avoid damage without comboing Reflex, which is a waste of MP. Jafar is no joke here, and honestly the only reason he wasn't hair-pullingly frustrating was because his DM does very little damage to us and allows us to charge our MP fully. Halloween Town is luckily easier upon revisit. Halfway through the world, we enter a fight that requires us to gather 4 presents from Heartless. This can become a massive undertaking if you take too long, but if you do it right by summoning Chicken Little to use Magnet and then spamming fire, it can be over in 10 seconds. I could have probably also used Magnet myself, but it wasn't in my quick select, so... Later, after the present making minigame, we have the boss fight with Experiment. This fight isn't easy, but it's not near as bad as it was on level 1. We start by finally unleashing the godly ability that is Duck Flare for tons of free damage. Once that's done, summon Stitch. Use Cure as needed, but our primary objective is to use Reflect on Experiment until it breaks apart. Once it does, use Kick Spring and hope that it actually works. This is the easiest part of the battle to die on because we can so easily be juggled by the spinning head section. When it finally joins back together, we go back to reflecting. Repeat until it gets low before dismissing Stitch and using Duck Flare to finish things off. For winning, we'll get the true Ultima weapon, Decisive Pumpkin, but it won't be of any use to us here, so let it rot in your inventory. RIP Best Keyblade. Pride Lands is simultaneously way easier on revisit and way more difficult. The first fight is with the 3 hyenas again. This is a joke, but it's also pretty boring. All they do is run away from us. Luckily, they will eventually stop, meaning we can just skulk behind them until ready to go on the offensive. When ready, run up, lock on, use Thunder to get them airborne, and then spam fire until we're out of MP. They'll run a ways away before stopping again. Catch up, but don't get too close. Let our MP recharge, and then repeat. The Ground Shaker boss is the only part left, and this is quite a bit more dangerous than Scar was. More or less, our best option is just spamming Simba's Wildcat limit whenever we can. This will take the boss out in 3 or 4 uses. The rest of the battle is best spent far away from the massive beast, so that we can safely recharge our MP. Trying anything else will almost guarantee that we get walloped, so just don't get greedy. Our final Disney world is Space Paranoids again, which is much harder this time around. The first battle is with a bunch of extremely dangerous Heartless, including the Devastator type. However, with Reflect, we're fine. Next up is a fight that primarily consists of a bunch more Devastators. This can get tricky, but using Stitch can really help. If we primarily focus on spacing and Reflect only when necessary, we can double down on spamming Thunder Magic on a single Devastator at a time. It took quite a few tries, but I got this one done without much effort by just playing it cool. The final mob fight here is with a bunch of Heartless, including yet again more Devastators. But what makes this harder is that we're on a Solar Sailor, which can only hold so much weight. If the meter maxes out, we lose. So this time we need to skip the Reflex as much as possible and just spam Thunder because it's faster. With luck, Stitch will keep us in MP, otherwise this fight is near impossible without our Keyblade. I could have probably switched the Photon Debugger Keyblade to make Thunder more effective, but I finished this battle before I needed to. The boss fight here comes in 2 phases, and yet again, if we fail the later one, we have to restart both. It's best to equip the Circle of Life Keyblade to speed up MP recharge here. The first phase is just Sark and a few Heartless. It's boring and easy, with the focus being on reflecting as Disc to stagger him for a while. When applicable, we can spam Tron's setup limit to make things go faster, but we also need to try to have as much MP as possible when we start the next battle. Now that we're fighting Giant Fetish Sark and the MCP, the real danger begins. MCP is only vulnerable when we destroy some of his firewalls, and even when we do, they'll frequently spin around, forcing a chase. They also shoot powerful lasers later on, and your allies love to knock themselves out on these firewalls constantly. This is particularly annoying since we can only safely damage MCP when Sark's unconscious, which is a limited window, but we need Tron alive to use the delete reaction command to do said damage. So effectively, this is a frantic mess of a battle for the first half. Most of our time is spent using Reflect on Sark's ankles, and then slowly knocking him out with jumping fire spells. Sark does offer up a reaction command that will instantly knock him out, which when I was doing my level 1 run, I remember being able to do from the beginning of the fight. But according to randoms on the internet, you can't do the reaction command until the fight is around half over. And that's what happened here, so take that as you will. Regardless, we can run away from Sark whenever we need to charge MP. If we're lucky, he'll summon a wall to stop us. allowing us to use the high climb reaction command, which will immediately KO him. Then it's all about finding an opening in the firewall and keeping Tron alive long enough to use delete. Also, we don't want to waste time trying to destroy all of the walls, or even a large chunk of them, since the MCP will just create more if we take away too many. Once that difficult battle is done, it's time to move on to the final stretch. For winning, we finally get Reflega, so according to the internet, we're officially now truly OP. The fight with Axel by our side is the first notable encounter once we get to Twilight Town, because the mob configuration is a bit aggressive, and we lose Donald and Goofy. Still, the arena is more than large enough to avoid the enemies extremely easily, so we can let Axel do his thing while occasionally spamming spells or reflects, whatever is safest in the moment. Finishing this gives us the Bond of Flame Keyblade, which does extra fire damage, but more importantly, it also has a magic stat of 4, which is the highest we've gotten up to this point, and now is when we want to equip it. The next fight is with Roxas, which took me around 6 hours. In fact, I ended up stopping my recording to take a break and came back later to practice different strategies. It was during this practice, while I wasn't recording, that I initially beat Roxas, so I saved the clip, complete with ugly copyright watermark, from my console. When I finally got back to recording the next day, I decided to go back to the file I'd saved before beating Roxas and try to do it again. It took another 20 minutes, but I got it again. So how do you beat Roxas, and why is he so difficult without a Keyblade? Well, not only do we have very few options against Roxas already, since Donald and Goofy aren't with us, but we also have even less options in this challenge, since we can't use Limit Form for anything but healing, filling MP, and dodge rolling attacks. We more or less have to use basic spells, items, and reflect to beat him. But it gets even worse when you realize that we also can't utilize the end reaction command where we steal Roxas Keyblades. It's fairly random whether he decides to force you into this reaction command, and a lot of the times it never showed up. But when it did, it was a problem, and since we're only level 36, we don't have second chance. That means we have to successfully do the reaction command or we die instantly. But once we do, Roxas gets much more dangerous since he starts spamming powerful laser attacks that can't be used against him since he's always too far away for Reflect to hit him. On top of that, we can't quick run or jump near him since the Keyblades that he gives us enter attack mode automatically and can accidentally tag Roxas, breaking the rules of the run. Even when we don't steal Roxas Keyblades, once we get his health to 1/3 of the way down, he starts spamming those same lasers with all of his basic attacks as well. There are a few ways to deal with this, but only one of them is consistent. He's dangerous for a host of other reasons, but that's the gist of it. With all of that in mind, we can beat Roxas in one of 3 ways. Firstly, we can be ultra careful and focus on reflecting only when necessary. During the initial phase, this means we mostly quick run away for safety when he gets close. If he uses his AoE spin attack, we wait in safety. If he uses his jumping spiral, we reflect. If he uses his combo, we close in a bit and try to put him in between us and the edge of the arena. If we stay close enough to the wall, this is consistent and means we can reflect him and hit him. The main reason for this specific pattern is because just reflecting his last hit anywhere in the arena has a high chance of the reflect explosions dealing little to no damage because Roxas moves out of range. Regardless, we want to have the Bond of Flame equipped because reflect does damage based not on how many attacks you reflect or physical strength, but rather our magic stat. Since it has the highest magic stat for a Keyblade we have access to, it deals the most damage. Anyway, once we get him past the first phase, he'll start using lasers. We more or less do the same thing here, but this time we have to either quick run around the combo of lasers, or be in a specific position to block the main combo. Doing it just right means the lasers will all miss us. Doing it wrong means we're probably dead. The second way to take care of Roxas is to use a sort of variation on the speedrun loop. With the right combination of attacks, we can loop Roxas for most of the fight. However, the normal version of the loop uses limit form limits and Keyblade attacks. While I was attempting this, and ranting a bit on the Resonant Arc Discord's Kingdom Hearts section, another user by the name of Karasu decided it'd be fun to attempt the same fight. They succeeded hours before me using this method, and did it at level 1 on top of that. I'll leave the video in the description if you want to check it out because it's super impressive. The third way to beat Roxas focuses on blocking in the first half and reflecting in the second half. Instead of avoiding the main combo early in the fight, we get in Roxas' face and block. Time it right and it'll block the first part of the combo, guard again and we'll block the second half. Then we can reflect the final slash to deal damage to Roxas a good 80% of the time, since doing it this way seems to mean he consistently ends up closer to us than otherwise. This also gives us the chance to reflect his spin attack, since if we block and he doesn't attack, he'll go straight into that, meaning we're already right next to him and can time a perfect reflect spell. Once the lasers come, get ready to spam items. I tried to avoid doing this, but ended up having to use it for both of my victories here. Since I can't consistently deal with the lasers and stay close to Roxas, this method just had me reflecting through the entire combo. This ensures that we're close enough to hit him with reflect most times, and keeps us safe. Problem is, it means we're downing ethers like they're candy. If we don't kill him before we run out, we have a problem. We're effectively brute forcing the second half of the fight this way. It feels cheap, but it's doable. And with Roxas finally down, we've only got a few fights left. Roxas gives us the 2 become 1 Keyblade, which allows us to easily access Final Form. However, leveling Final Form without hitting enemies with our Keyblade would be a tedious nightmare, since both blades hover around us nearby and attack enemies when we take almost any action. I think you could do it, but I really don't want to waste my time and I don't think we'll need it, so we won't be getting Glide during this playthrough unfortunately. Still, it's worth unlocking the form regardless, because doing so means we can max out Wisdom and Master Form to get the best versions of Quick Run and Aerial Dodge. Our first fight in the world that never was proper is with Xigbar. It took me a decent handful of tries, but unlike with Roxas, we have a lot of options at our disposal. Equip Circle of Life for MP haste and start the battle by casting Duck Flare. Since the battle is still in its early phase, we don't want to waste an ether yet. Instead, we can let MP charge go naturally, since Xigbar is so non-aggressive right now. Donald should keep us healthy while we block all of the arrows fired at us, and surprisingly, Donald doesn't die that often here either, meaning it's easy to go straight back into Duck Flare once our MP is filled. Once we've gotten through the second limit, we can use an ether and a high potion if we're worried. We then have to wait for the dregs of our MP to finish charging, then we can use Duck Flare again when safe. By this point, Xigbar is hitting fast, hitting hard, and probably using his DM. Surviving it is the same as usual with this fight. It's mostly just about being careful. Ether again, and finish him off with a final Duck Flare or 2. Next up is stupid, dumb, awful Luxord, the worst fight in this game if you ask me. I'm not exactly a fan of the fact that Data Luxord requires you to beat his more difficult DM to win, considering that it's a random minigame rather than something combat related. Luckily, that's not the case here. However, he forces us into dice form at the beginning, and if we're not ready, he will always cheap shot us immediately. Once out of dice form, we can take this battle slow. We're rarely in any danger if we're careful. When safe, it's best to flip his nearby cards, which always forces him to start a game with us. Winning the game stuns him, allowing us to pelt him with spells. If we're safe about this, we don't have to worry about running out of MP and going into MP charge, because he won't be too aggressive. Eventually though, he will do his DM. It's not a big deal if we fail, though it is dangerous. Luckily, losing doesn't massively deplete our time gauge, nor fill his own like it does against Data Luxord, so we can just keep playing like normal and he'll go down. Overall, dangerous and slow, but fairly simple. Saïx is next, and this battle is fairly straightforward until the very brutal last quarter. Immediately summon Stitch. Saïx will then berserk around like a loser for a while. Our goal is to avoid his attacks and then take our chance to catch a sword. Story Saïx is kind of a junky fight, since it takes a while for the berserk reaction command to show up, but we're not invincible while hovering around holding the sword, unlike in the Data version. Still, early on it's not too difficult to avoid damage. Using this reaction command will knock Saïx out of berserk, making him extra vulnerable. However, he'll immediately start charging it back up. While charging his Berserk gauge, Sykes will try to attack. Using Reflect can stun him, deal damage, and make him drop his weapon in a single action. Pick up the sword, and when the reaction command shows up, smack him to high heavens. Since he's not in Berserk, it'll do a good chunk more damage than it would otherwise. We need to repeat this as much as we can before he enters Berserk again, which he'll do faster and faster as he gets more beat up. Eventually, Sykes will start doing his DM, which sucks hard when you don't have access to glide or high jump at all. If we survive, that's our cue to take him out as quickly as possible. By that point, Stitch is usually nearly gone. This means we need to make sure we have some MP remaining when he leaves, so we can use Duck Flare the next time Sykes is vulnerable. From this point, we have to sort of improvise. I scrounged up enough drive to call Stitch out again, though you could wait and use another Duck Flare. Once he's down, we're finally at the last chunk of fights. Xemnas 1 doesn't pose much of a challenge. His combos are easy to avoid if we're playing safe, and we can close in to use Reflect to deal damage at the end. We don't want to try and reflect his basic guard attacks since he can combo through them and a single reflect won't last long enough to avoid said combo. Instead, we only reflect his double hit and the end of his long combo. Eventually, he'll start nearly always double hitting out of his guard, which then allows us to deplete his health much faster. When the fight's just about to wrap up, he'll do the building reaction command, and we can take out all the rest of his health by waiting for the third prompt to show up. A quick thunder will end the battle from there. Now we're entering the gauntlet. After slicing up a few buildings, we end up standing in front of a giant laser cannon. At first, I was a dumb idiot and was trying to use thunder on the bomb enemies. Eventually, I wised up though and used magnet, which sends them into the cannons en masse, and for much less MP. At the door section, we spam fire. When threatened by the enemies that can appear, we can summon Stitch if we need to. Another section where taking it slow is best. Once that's over, we have the first fight against Armor Xemnas. He seems like he might pose a threat at first, but he's legit a joke. Stitch will keep you safe if you want to play a little looser, but we can beat him without taking any damage by standing just outside of the reach of his barrier. Doing so will manipulate him into going between the barrier and his wide-swinging sword attack. The swing can be reflected, and if you're standing in the right spot, he'll take the reflect damage. Meanwhile, that same spot is just outside of the range of his barrier, meaning we can safely reflect it not once, but twice. This is the freest fight in the game, honestly. Finish that, and it'll be just us and Riku for the final stretch. The first section is another auto-scroller on a flying bike thing. Luckily, we don't have to use attack here because the barrier and laser attacks work just fine. With that over comes the second fight with Armor Xemnas. This is a bit more dangerous. He uses lasers to hit us if we aren't right up in his face, and at set HP values, he'll launch us across space, where we'll then have to reapproach by smacking buildings at him. Literally. But the same tactic as before still applies, meaning this is the second easiest fight in the run, just behind the first fight with Armor Xemnas. With all of that done, it's time for the real fight with the true Zebra himself, Final Xemnas. This would have been torture if we were on any other version of Final Mix, since his opening reaction command is broken in every other version besides the non-Final Mix PS2 version. Luckily, Square fixed it in a patch on the PS4. If they hadn't, we'd have to rely on Riku's session limit here. With that first reversal section out of the way, the battle is a pretty safe bet most of the way through. Xemnas will deal lots of damage that's difficult to avoid, and it's hard to hit him consistently since he teleports everywhere. However, Riku cannot die, and can charge his MP extremely fast, to the point where he can give us a health potion every 10 seconds or so. So all we have to do is try and tag Xemnas where we can, and otherwise focus on staying alive. Eventually, he'll start using lots of lasers, but it's still mostly just as easy to survive. I personally focused on just staying healthy because Xemnas will leave this phase after a while, usually by doing the minigame where he captures Sora and you have to play as Riku. Therefore, we want to make sure that we have as much HP as possible when this happens. Just like normal, we can poke the Xemnas clone with dark aura spheres to keep him at bay while we reach Sora. After that, Xemnas goes back to his normal phase again, which allows us to continue whittling his health down until we enter the Mega Ultra Omega Uber Laser Dome of Doom and Darkness. And from that point, we'd have to fall asleep at the controller to lose. Once it's over, another quick thunder will end him, and signify the end of the run. This run could probably be pushed further by getting rid of all of the combat reaction commands that may potentially use the Keyblade. A lot of work, but if you put enough time into going frame by frame through these reaction commands, you could probably narrow it down to the ones you are and aren't allowed to do. And you could no doubt also do this challenge at level 1 if you wanted, but honestly, I don't think it would make that much of a difference in difficulty. Regardless, the only real times you have to use the Keyblade are during the Rock Shatter reaction command and during the fight with the Steamboat box, if I'm remembering correctly, which surprised me a fair bit. I thought we'd have to use it a lot more. The hardest part was no doubt Roxas, though there were definitely bits that were far more tedious, particularly the fights that don't have checkpoints in between them. The time I spent fighting Roxas flew by. The time I spent doing things like Thresholder was torture. Anyway, tell me what you guys thought in the comments below, like the video if you enjoyed it, check out some of my other videos like my recent critique of Kingdom Hearts 3 if they look interesting, and subscribe if you're not and you enjoy what I have on offer. See you guys next time.